So I spent quite a long time in the army as a soldier and then as an officer, and I worked for the Secretary of Defence until quite recently. I've been to Afghanistan fairly recently, and I've been to Iraq in the last few weeks. I've been to something like take military action in a foreign country. You've got the interests of the UK at heart, and I'd like to think most people have got the interests of the people of that country at heart as well. You can't simply talk about getting out as quickly as you can without thinking about the effect that has on people there. I completely agree. I've met Hamid Karzai. He's corrupt and terrible, and that was one of the reasons I resigned from the Ministry of Defence. And we are unquestionably supporting a regime that's dreadful. The alternative, and I've met people who've worked for Osama bin Laden, and I've met Taliban quite recently. The alternative is that you recognise that there are people, tribal chieftains, who frankly will switch sides at a moment's notice in Afghanistan. You've got to recognise what their interests are, and their interests are by and large in no way aligned to Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda, and that you can find eventually an in-country solution. And there are lots of professional people, many of whom lived in the UK, who can put a decent Afghanistan together. And I think within the next year or so we'll be in a position to start withdrawing troops. And I suppose fundamentally, and there's a number of really powerful moral imperatives in all of this, but people in Britain want British troops to come out of Afghanistan, and that tips the balance now in favour of doing exactly that, while still leaving fairly expensive, by the way, structures in place that help the people of Afghanistan. We're not in Afghanistan to make sure that more women and girls are in education and so forth, but it's got to be a good thing. We've got to care about these people. We don't just pull out and let whatever happens happen, like when the Russians left. As John referred to the Russians leaving, we simply can't do that. But we have to bring troops out next year, and that's a fact of life. The American president has already said he's going to do it. We have to be able to do the same thing and not rely on the idea that we somehow punch above our weight. That really can't be the case. On Trident, again, people may be surprised to hear this, but people with a military background tend to think Trident's a waste of money. I'd much rather we got rid of Trident and spend money on better equipment for troops. And there's always an argument, troops will always want better equipment. Troops do a fantastically good job. They will always want better equipment, and they can always have better equipment. They're well equipped, but there's always new and better equipment coming out. Armour's lighter, weapons are more accurate, and all that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, the issue with Trident is a moral argument. It's not really about money. When I listen, for example, John was talking there about just simply getting rid of it. There's a geopolitical fact that we have Trident at the moment. You can't just get rid of it tomorrow. We have to commit ourselves to doing that and work out how we do it. If you get rid of Trident now, the cost to the UK taxpayer would be exponential. You would have to decommission now. The cost would be enormous in the front end, those costs. What we have to do is commit ourselves to a proper relationship with other European countries. France has got nuclear weapons. I don't want to rely on a French nuclear weapon. Nobody really needs nuclear weapons anymore. The challenge is how we get other countries to get rid of theirs as well. As it is, Trident serves no military purpose. And I happen to think that over the next 2 or 3 years, certainly under the Labour government, there is scope to change that policy. There is a very, very fragile commitment to the policy of renewing Trident, replacing Trident. Not till about 2013. We have to commit ourselves to it, and I think there's scope for a proper campaign to turn that around, and I've written about that extensively in the last year or so. And finally, on Iraq, Katie said that we're slightly deceived, and I can tell you, having sat there in the House of Commons, I feel a lot more than slightly deceived. When you go to Iraq now, and we need to think about what the world's like now in 2010. They just had an election, but you couldn't, and I was there, you couldn't get elected as a member of Parliament in Iraq if you simply said, I'm a Sunni, vote for me, or I'm a Shia, vote for me. So what you saw was coalitions. They had to put coalitions together from both sides, and that was such a powerful thing to watch. The elections were well won, they had higher turnout than we might have next week, and that was something pretty good to watch. And perhaps just to conclude, in 1979 Iraq had a similar GDP, similar sized economy to Portugal. By the time Saddam had finished with it, it was a complete mess. Iraq isn't like Afghanistan, actually. Iraq can be back in the same league within 10 or 15 years if we give them proper support. And regardless of whether you agree with it or not in the past, and clearly there was a lot of misleading going on. There was a lot of bad intelligence and so forth. But the main thing now is you give people in Iraq a fair crack.